Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In today's ripe stories, an HOA Karen calls me at 2 AM and demands that I give her the keys to my private property so she can use my jacuzzi. Let's dive right into the video. This story is titled Insane Homeowner Association Karen Calls Me at 2 AM when I am on vacation. Sometimes there are things people do that are so incredibly illogically stupid that you cannot even stay mad at them. It's not even about the laughter you get at their expense, but the fact that this person, who has done nothing but annoy the crap out of you for as long as you've known them, has finally at least given you a good story to tell. Before our incident, Karen had done nothing in my life besides making a lifelong resident of HOA neighborhoods completely understand why everyone hates them nowadays. My work brought me to a new city and a new HOA which had a Karen on the board. As a whole, the board was a bit more overbearing than I preferred when it came to uniformity and cleanliness of the neighborhood. They made it hard for me to get the permits and purchase a pool and jacuzzi for my backyard, but I'm from a city that was within sight of the ocean and I wanted my escape from this new landlocked state. Still, I had my privacy from most of the HOA members. There were two people that made me feel watched at the most inconvenient of times. Evelyn, my elderly neighbor, was a sweet old lady and I genuinely like her a lot. Still, her insomniac tendencies meant that I could be in my backyard at any random time of night and not be sure if her white halo of hair would be watching from the balcony. That was the only thing I could not stand about her, and Karen, who had no excuse for being obnoxious, of course. I did not even realize how bad it was until I spoke to the contractors putting my pool in, and they explained that Karen came nearly every day to speak with them during the construction. They had just assumed that me and her were good friends. In fact, they thought she was my wife until I introduced her to them. She knew my work schedule and even knew when me or my wife might have dropped the other off at the airport. She would show up with casseroles some nights when my wife was with her family or on a work trip and suggest that I needed it since the woman in my life was so often absent. And no, she was not trying to get herself in between me and my wife or anything. I think she convinced herself that she was living in the 50s. Me and my wife fly a lot for vacations and we had a trip coming up that we had both been looking forward to. Before we left on the trip, I got paranoid and did something in the middle of the night when even Evelyn's white hair was not present on her balcony. I changed the location of my emergency keys. I remember how confused my wife was when I told her what I had done, but it was the middle of the night, so she just shrugged it off. We flew out the next day and it was time for our vacation. We landed in the early afternoon, so after a show, dinner and a bit of exploring, it was already getting late and we were tired, so we turned in. I woke up at 2 AM to my wife shaking me awake. She grumbled at me about my phone ringing and I answered it. "Hello?" I said, trying not to sound too groggy. "OP?" I recognized Karen's voice, but I had never exchanged numbers with her. "Karen? How did you—" "Oh, I looked it up in the HOA records because I need to know where your emergency house keys are." Karen said this so dismissively, like it was not one of a collection of major breaches in privacy. "My emergency at 2 AM? OP, this is a situation that could very quickly escalate into an HOA emergency. I need to know where your keys are." She sounded exasperated. I tried to shake some of the grogginess out of my head and asked, "What is the emergency?" "That is not important," Karen claimed. "I need the keys for now and then I can explain later. The only emergency that could possibly be that urgent is if something was drowning in my pool." Is that what's happening? And if there is an emergency going on, why did she sound more annoyed than concerned? "No, OP. I think I would avoid calling you and wasting everyone's time if someone was drowning in your pool, since it takes 2 to 3 business days to get you to answer a simple question," Karen said. Whoa, no need for venom. If you cannot explain the emergency to me, then I'm afraid you will just have to go without my code. "You don't want to do this, OP. If I need it badly enough, I can just break in. And I have plenty of ears turned my way on the HOA board, so I can turn this against you quickly." Are you threatening me? After a moment of silence, she spat out, "Stingy bitch," and then the line went dead. I tried to go back to sleep, but was kept awake by a string of messages and one call that I declined that ended up with a voicemail. All of these chock full of vulgarities about how stingy I am and what a deviant I am. Apparently, I came into her neighborhood to ruin the peace. I had turned the phone to vibrate and given up on trying to pass through what was happening here. It was time to get back to sleep, except another call came in, and when I glanced at the call ID, I saw Evelyn instead of Karen. It was another notorious sleepless night for her, I guess, just like it was turning out to be for me. Hello? Another phone greeting before it was even 3 AM, on vacation. Well, OP, your generation does TV boring, but at least you're providing me with some entertainment. I couldn't help but grin. I liked Evelyn. She reminded me of my grandma. I mean that whatever stories your creatively bankrupt Hollywood tries to put out will never top the slapstick comedy that was watching Karen break into your backyard. Wait, what? So Evelyn told me what she had seen when a sleepless night combined with the sound of a few voices brought her out onto the balcony, and apparently Karen was in my backyard with who Evelyn at first assumed was her husband, Ed. She said my gate was standing open, and in the light of day she realized that the lock had been bashed open. The two figures were standing around the lockbox that contained the controls for the jacuzzi, and as Evelyn watched, they bashed open the lockbox with a rock. The only issue was the idiots didn't try to break open the lock or even the correct part of the box, but managed to bash in the back of the box where the circuit board and power all connect. Evelyn had gotten out her phone and turned on the camera to record at about this time, perfectly in time to hear the man exclaim, "Damn!" and throw the box away from him. This is also the first time we hear the man's voice loud enough for Evelyn to realize that this was not Ed with Karen. Whatever they had done had caused a large patio light to flick on. The male stranger had managed to toss the control panel into the pool after they had bashed open the electronics, which meant that my patio light turned into a rave strobe light before blowing out. The descent back into the dark made it even harder to tell what was going on, but Karen's voice had gotten just loud enough that Evelyn could hear that she was furious. Amongst what was mostly impossible to understand, Karen spoke up enough for Evelyn to hear her say, "I just wanted a night for the two of us," to someone other than her husband. At this point in the call, it was obvious how much pleasure Evelyn got out of the scandal in that statement. Old people need some drama in their life every once in a while, it seems. One of the illicit couples suggested that they tried to spend some time in the jacuzzi anyway, but after Karen put her feet in, she kicked in anger, obviously not happy to deal with cold, still water. Her partner walked her over to the patio furniture, only for Karen to lash out and break the flower pots that were on display on the table in what could only be described as an adult having a temper tantrum. Oh, the cops just arrived. It looks like they didn't realize anyone had been observing. How stupid can they get? I replied, "What's going on?" So she told me about Karen's frantic attempts to hide her partner, which ended up with her telling him to hold his breath in the jacuzzi when she decided that breaking down my back door was too much trouble. Unsurprisingly, this did little to hide her partner besides making it very entertaining to watch the footage for when he finally burst from the water right in front of the two cops. I wish they'd been facing the camera. I didn't want to end my vacation too soon, so I called a good friend of mine and let him know of my new hiding place for my spare key. I had him go and make sure nothing was in urgent need of repairs or being looked at, and for him to walk the police through the damages. When we got back from the vacation, I pressed charges, and the footage plus witnesses were more than enough to force Karen to pay me back for all the property damage, and surprisingly that included mine and my wife's flight back as if it had ended my vacation immediately. The legal stuff was fine and all, but it was more of a chore to get the repairs covered without me having to pay anything since it was not my fault. What was far more satisfying though happened outside of court. Unfortunately, Evelyn was not able to get that part on film, or we might have had a pilot going. Instead, the neighborhood just had the good fortune to watch as Ed unloaded all of Karen's stuff onto his lawn. He was putting price stickers on the items when Karen came in crying and screaming and begging. Ed just told her the date he planned to have the yard sale if she didn't get her crap off his lawn. She told him that she would sit in the middle of the yard and not move until he gave her some sort of a second chance, but she gave up after less than an hour-long attempt. She picked up her things in a U-Haul, and I have not seen her since, even though I'm collecting her money. I just hope wherever she goes, she is not able to trick them into letting her on the HOA board. I sympathize with anyone who has an HOA board that thinks they deserve full freedom of using the possessions of their homeowners like they are hers. This one is titled, "Am I the a-hole for flying a pirate flag after my HOA fined me for a flagpole I did not even install?" So this whole mess started about 6 months ago when my wife and I bought our first house. After years of apartment living, we were thrilled to finally have a place to call our own, a modest 3-bedroom home in what seemed like a nice quiet neighborhood. And by the way guys, is it just me, or is a 3-bedroom home not very modest? Anyway, the previous owner had left a few things behind, some shelving in the garage, a fire pit in the backyard, and a flagpole in the front yard. I didn't think much about the flagpole at first. It was about 20 feet tall, aluminum, and didn't have a flag on it. I figured I would eventually get around to putting up an American flag or maybe our state flag. 3 weeks after moving in, I found an envelope from the HOA tucked into our mailbox. I opened it up expecting some kind of welcome packet or information about trash pickup days, but instead it was a notice of violation. The violation was non-conforming flagpole height, maximum allowed height 15 feet, current height 20 feet, fine $150. Remediation required within 30 days. I stared at the letter in disbelief. We had not even installed this flagpole. It was there when we bought the house. You've got to be kidding me, I said to my wife as I handed her the letter. She read it over and frowned. Did the inspection not catch this? Apparently not, I replied, or maybe the previous owner had some kind of exemption. I don't know, but I'm not paying a fine for something I didn't do. Well, the next day, I called the HOA office. After being on hold for 20 minutes, I finally got through to someone. Hey, I just moved into the neighborhood and received a violation notice about a flagpole that was already installed when I bought the house. I'm hoping we can clear this up. Property address. The woman's voice was flat and disinterested. I gave her my address. Ah yes, that property has an outstanding violation for an oversized flagpole. The fine is $150. But I just bought the house, I explained. The flagpole was already there. Shouldn't the previous owner be responsible for this? The violation goes with the property, sir. When you purchased the house, you accepted all existing violations. Was this disclosed during the sale? Because I didn't see anything about it. Well, that would be between you, the seller, and your real estate agent. The HOA is not responsible for ensuring disclosures are made during private sales. I took a deep breath. Look, I'm new to the neighborhood. I did not install this flagpole. Can you waive the fine since I just moved in? I will get it fixed. I'm afraid that's not possible. The rules apply to everyone equally. Can I appeal this decision? You can submit a written appeal to the board, which will be reviewed at the next meeting in 6 weeks. 6 weeks? That seemed excessive for such a simple issue. Is there anyone else I can talk to about this? Maybe the board president? All appeals must go through the proper channels, sir. After hanging up, I was fuming. I immediately called my real estate agent, who seemed surprised about the violation. I didn't see anything about a flagpole in the disclosures, she said. Let me reach out to the seller's agent. Well then, 2 days later, she called back. So apparently the previous owner never received a violation notice. The HOA claims that they sent one, but he says he never got it. And since he's already moved across the country, he's not exactly eager to deal with this. Well, that's just great. I was stuck with a $150 fine for something I didn't do, but it was not just the money, it was the principle of the thing. I decided to try one more approach before giving in. I wrote a polite but firm letter to the HOA board explaining the situation and requesting that they waive the fine since I was a new homeowner who inherited this issue. I included copies of my closing documents showing when I purchased the house, and 3 weeks later I got a response. Appeal denied, fine due immediately. Additional fines of $25 per week will accrue until the violation is remediated. That is when I realized I was dealing with a particularly rigid and unreasonable HOA. Fine, I thought, I will fix the flagpole. I called a few contractors to get quotes on either lowering the existing pole or replacing it altogether. The cheapest quote I got was $600, 4 times the amount of the original fine. When I reported this to my wife, she suggested just paying the fine and leaving the flagpole as is. We will just keep getting fined, I pointed out. True, she sighed. What about removing it completely, is that allowed? I checked the HOA guidelines. Flagpoles were permitted, just not over 15 feet tall. Removing it entirely would be compliant, but that seemed like letting them win somehow. Plus the quotes for removal were still around $400. While I was mulling over my options, our next door neighbor stopped by to introduce himself. When I mentioned the flagpole dilemma, he laughed. Oh, you're dealing with that too? Yeah, the HOA here is notorious. They've got nothing better to do than measure grass height and fence paint colors. Have you had issues with them too? I asked. Everyone has, he replied. Last year they fined me because my Christmas lights were up until January 3rd. The rules say they have to be down by January 2nd. We chatted a bit more, and he mentioned that the monthly HOA board meetings were usually pretty empty, with the same 5 or 6 people making all the decisions. Most people just pay the fines because, well, it's easier than fighting, he explained. The board likes it that way. This information just made me even more determined not to cave in. The next day I went to the hardware store and bought a flag. But not just any flag. I bought a massive pirate flag complete with skull and crossbones. My wife raised an eyebrow when she saw it. Are you sure about this? The HOA guidelines specify what kind of flagpoles are allowed, but they don't say anything about what flags can be flown, I explained. I checked twice. This feels like poking a bear, she warned. Maybe, but it'll make me feel better. The next morning, I proudly raised my pirate flag up the 20-foot pole. It was impressive, I have to admit, the black fabric with its white skull and crossbones fluttering dramatically against the blue sky, visible from halfway down the block. It took less than 24 hours for the response. This time, the HOA president himself was at my door, letter in hand. "Good afternoon," he said stiffly. His eyes flicked up to the pirate flag. "I'm here about your display." My flag? Is there a problem? He handed me the letter. "This is a formal notice that your flag violates HOA guidelines regarding neighborhood aesthetics." I opened the letter right there in front of him, and sure enough, it cited a vague rule about displays must be in keeping with the neighborhood's family-friendly atmosphere. Interesting, I said, because I've read through all the flag guidelines, and there's nothing specific about what types of flags are allowed or prohibited. "It is implied," he said, his face reddening. "So if I put up a sports team flag that some people might find objectionable, then would that also violate the rules?" "That is different." "How?" "A pirate flag is. It's inappropriate." "According to whom?" "My kids love pirates." "Many people do. Pirates of the Caribbean was a very successful movie franchise." He was not amused. "The fine is $250 and you need to remove both the oversized flagpole and the inappropriate flag within 48 hours. "Ah, so now it's $250? The flagpole violation was only $150. "Well, this is a separate violation," he explained tersely. "I see. And if I get the flagpole height reduced to 15 feet, but keep my pirate flag, the flag would still be in violation, even though there's no specific rule against it?" He was clearly getting frustrated. "The board has discretion to interpret the rules." "Convenient," I remarked. "Well, thank you for letting me know. I will review the letter carefully later." After he left, I did exactly that and then did some additional research. I learned that in our state, HOAs have certain limitations on what they can regulate regarding flags. The state law specifically protected the right to fly the American flag, state flags and military service flags, but it was silent on other types. I also discovered that our HOA had a history of selective enforcement and overreach. On a neighborhood social media page, I found dozens of complaints about arbitrary fines and inconsistent rule application. The more I learned, the more determined I became. I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting the original flagpole issue, all my communications with the HOA, and the lack of specific regulations against pirate flags and relevant state laws. I also took photos of several other houses in the neighborhood with violations that apparently were not being addressed. Overgrown lawns, non-compliant decorations, and even a basketball hoop that had been in a driveway for years despite rules prohibiting them. Then I did something the HOA clearly was not expecting. I sent out letters to every house in the neighborhood. The letters explained my situation and detailed what I had learned about our HOA's practices and invited everyone to the next board meeting to discuss whether these practices truly represented what the community wanted. The next board meeting had record attendance. Nearly half the neighborhood showed up and many with their own stories of arbitrary fines and frustrating interactions. The board members looked stunned as person after person stood up to speak. "I paid $300 because my fence was the wrong shade of brown," said one homeowner. "They fined me because my garbage can was visible from the street for a few hours on a non-trash day," said another. "My children's small chalk drawings on our own driveway apparently decreased property values," a mother reported sarcastically. The meeting ran 2 hours over schedule. By the end, the board agreed to review their enforcement practices and create a more transparent process for rule modifications. They also agreed to waive my flagpole fine if I would work with them on reasonable flag guidelines for the future. I agreed actually, and over the next few months I actually joined a committee to revise the HOA guidelines. We created clear specific rules that were easier to understand and follow, with a fair enforcement process that included property notifications and reasonable timelines for corrections. As for my pirate flag, I reluctantly took it down after a few weeks as a show of good faith, though the board's president expression every time he drove past my house made it entirely worth it. I eventually replaced it with an American flag on a properly shortened 15-foot pole, though I still fly the pirate flag on special occasions like Halloween and Talk Like a Pirate Day. It's become something of a neighborhood joke now. So Reddit, am I the jerk for flying a pirate flag and stirring up the whole neighborhood after my HOA fined me for a flagpole that I did not even install? And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Is OP the a-hole here or not? Comment number 1 said, "You're the a-hole and I'm honestly appalled. We just had our home appraisal drop 12k because some fool down the street started parking his project car in his driveway. Your little pirate flag shenanigans might seem cute to the Reddit crowd, but try explaining that to the family who cannot sell their house for what it's worth because your block now looks like a rejected Disney attraction." Comment number 2, not the a-hole, and this is honestly the best thing I've read all year. When our HOA tried to find me for my kids' unsightly chalk drawings, I just paid up because I was too exhausted to fight. You are out here living my dream revenge fantasy and I am here for it. Next meeting, I'm channeling this energy and bringing receipts. Comment number 3, everyone sucks here and I'm honestly cackling at this entire situation. Your HOA sounds like they've got rulers up their butts measuring grass plates, but did you really think going full Captain Jack Sparrow was the answer? Both you all need hobbies that don't involve making your neighbors uncomfortable at barbecues. Before we end the video, we will read an interesting story from r/petty revenge about an awful sister-in-law. The story starts like this. So my sister-in-law, let's call her Jill, is a petty narcissist with BPD, which I think means borderline personality disorder, who tried to pawn her 7-year-old daughter off on us indefinitely while she took some time out to work on herself and pursue her older boyfriend who did not like kids. So when we said we could of course help out, but we first had to ensure the girl's father was consulted on this plan, she threw a fit. Apparently, she had been working hard for the last 2 years to alienate her child from her father's affection, and it was working. If we were not willing to help her hide the child from him, she would ask someone else and no longer speak to us. A couple of days later, my husband asked me for our new Netflix password because his sister wanted to watch the movie Parenthood on our subscription. I told him, sure. I changed it to FUCKYOU Jill. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and I will see you again tomorrow.